Hello, this is Lady Tehila from the Coven of the Open Mind, and you're watching Wicca and Witchcraft 101. Hail and welcome. The topic this time is spooks. Evocation Part 2, where we talk about binding. And we will talk about spooks also, because as far as I'm concerned, the 4th of July is over. There's no more commercial holidays between now and Halloween. It's officially spooky season. And that makes it okay to talk about spooks and watch over the garden wall. Hi, mister. Hey, I've got a baby. I've got a baby B. And he is a baby me. And I love him how a mommy do. So I've got a baby B in here. Don't be sorry. Do feel free to distract him.
Switch the laundry over too.
There's no need to be sorry.
Come on, let's go, guys. There's no sitting for resting for me.
There ain't no rest for the wicked. Money don't grow on trees. You got bills to pay, you got mouths to feed. Ain't nothing in this world for free. They're gone. Okay, so you may be wondering where all of my books are and why this video is so late. And it's because we're moving. Well, we're supposed to be moving. It's been a lot of drama and chaos, but we're supposedly closing on a house next week, a homestead in the country. So wish us luck. But sorry that the lectures are behind. We may run into September now for the later lectures, but that's okay. We're still going to finish well before Samhain. For anyone who wants to do a self-initiation or initiate with us after this course is done, there's still plenty of time to do that. I'm going to try to get 2 videos out next week, as well as the Sabbath 101 video. So wish me luck. Anyway, so my books are all gone. I may still gesture to them because they're there in my mind. But in any case, today we are talking about binding. We'll start with an overview. What is binding? What makes it different than spell work and other things? And then we'll talk about what it means to bind different kinds of energies and what those energies are and how they manifest and all of that various stuff. We'll go through the fae, ghosts, demons, what it is to bind other humans, as well as deities and aspecting. We're not going to go into how to do all of things in total detail. We're going to talk about what some of these things are, and we're going to talk about the dangers associated with them and what it might look like if they go wrong, because for beginners, that's often the most important thing, especially people who are coming into this because they have experience and they're solitary, but maybe they're looking to like formalize, maybe you're formalizing your knowledge of Wicca and witchcraft. That's probably the bulk of our audience, and these are the kinds of things that people will run into when they're doing solitary work and maybe not always realize what it is that they're doing or using or running into and why they're having issues with it. And this will put a lot of that into perspective. And then we'll dive a little deeper into the kinds of binding that are more Wiccan in essence. But we'll talk about all of them in the sense of covering witchcraft. Like most Wiccans don't bind ghosts or the fae or demons. Most don't even bind other humans. And usually only leaders will bind deity. And I'll explain why it's okay to bind deity in some circumstances. So that's what we're covering today. Let's dive right in. Binding is a type of evocation magic. It is an expression of will and intent. It is a generation of energy from within yourself onto the world. It is a projection of ego, of desire. So it's evocation. That's binding. It's its own category, separate from spell work, separate from creating sigils, though creating sigils can sometimes involve binding, as we'll see. And it's separate from enchanting, though enchanting and binding can often be done simultaneously. So you will use spell work as well within the act of binding.
Sorry.
That's okay. It turns out that in magic, you can't just do anything that you want. There are some rules, right? It's not a free-for-all. Anybody can override the will of any other person at any time. There are techniques designed to facilitate overriding the will of other people, of higher consciousness, right, of manifestations of that higher consciousness into metaphysical beings in this plane. So the universe has consciousness of its own. And there are things that are truly outside of any individual person's control. And that's why, you know, if you want to influence the universe in some specific, more complex ways, then you need a more complex process, right? So that makes sense. Binding involves using outside energy. Okay, that's what makes it different than just regular spell work. It's very similar to regular spell work many times, but it's more complicated because you're using energy that is not your own with the express intent of overriding the will or desire of that energy. Unless it so happens that you're aligned with that energy, which sometimes is the technique, but not always, right? So especially not with some of the darker forces that you can use when you use binding, as we'll see. Now, the consciousness of the universe is something we talked about so much on this channel in past lectures. You all know I have a background in physics, so I know I have a theory of literally everything, and I don't shut up about it. So you can go back and watch all of that stuff again. We are going to start talking about magic and doing magic in purely magical terms. We're going to take for granted what these things metaphysically mean a little bit. I can't help myself but mention the metaphysics a bit. But this will get it out of the way. This is the bridge for us. What is the consciousness of the universe? Well, you remember from the metaphysics that the universe is higher dimensional. As you go up the planes of existence, as you increase the number of dimensions with which you look at the same space-time, you start to see different behavior. You start to see things function differently. They have different physics. It's still conscious, though, and we know that because we are conscious and we are one universe experiencing itself. So if any of that feels like it needs justification, you've got to go back and watch the previous lectures. But that's the one truth that we're operating by, that we are a single process. The universe is one being experiencing itself. So if we're conscious, the higher planes are conscious, right? As below, so above, as above, so below. Well, those kinds of consciousness in their metaphysical forms as forces, they have consciousness, but it's different than our own. It's something that is impossible for us to just conceive of as embodied beings, as beings who are bound by the limitations of our physical perception. But we have this ability to be aware, to perceive of things metaphysically. So we can pick up on the energies metaphysically, but we don't have the equipment necessarily to digest it. Maybe that's something we'll have in time. Maybe we're evolving towards it. But for now, all we can do is interpret these metaphysical energies according to the senses that we use every day. And that's why when we interact with ghosts, we see them. They're not really there. You can't capture them with a camera. But we'll all hallucinate the same ghost because it's all based on the same memory that we can all access, because within all of us is the same collective unconscious. Death is timeless and formless, so we'll come back to that. So these forces are transcendent, and that's why we use them in magic. They give us the ability to do magic that is transcendent. They help us transcend. We are projecting our ego onto this higher consciousness so that we can influence it. As below, so above. As above, so below. Which is the next lecture. That's the invocation side, which we cover next. Because it's a little bit riskier and you have to master shielding first. We'll go over shielding and shield networks again in this one so that you're totally solid on shielding by the time you're allowing energy inside of yourself directly. Even the stuff we're going to talk about today, which some of it can be triggering, I'll try to remember, I'll mention when we get to that stuff. But keep in mind that when things go wrong with evocation, they go very wrong. But that can happen with invocation as well. If you're not sure what energy you're invoking and you're not protecting yourself from outside influence. You know, so both any kind of empowered spiritual tradition is going to be is not without risk. And so we'll talk about some of the risks today, because most important to anything else is that you're doing these things safely. And if you're doing them with other people, in a room with people, it's often easier. We'll talk about that too. For now, this is how we break down the consciousness. We break it down by the level that it that it rests within. And you can think about it looking back at the planes of existence from Kabbalah or the numbers of dimensions, however it makes sense to you. The Fae, okay, that's what we call them, the Fae or just Fae. That's the consciousness of the elements, of the fundamental forces of physics. Is gravity conscious? Well, we would say yes, it is conscious. It's just a type of consciousness that is unembodied and difficult to understand. So you project your ego onto it, and then you can embody it within yourself, and then you can understand it in your own way. So that's how we work with the forces of nature. But when we work with them, we'll see them as being beings, things that we see with our mind's eye only, or some people will see them in the physical world. So we'll talk about which kinds of critters align with the 4 elements. Then you have other human beings. Humans are the concentration of life, okay, into manifest consciousness, right, into embodied existence. So humans have the most power over the physical world of all of these beings, but the way that the higher beings influence the world is subtle, and so it is less intense, it's less concentrated, but it in the end is usually more powerful, right? So deity is the consciousness not just of life, but of existence itself. It's a level above human life. The opposite of life is death. So you have these broken down on the slide in a very specific way. You see life-based manifestations of order, death-based manifestations of order. Order is deity, order is light, order is white light that you focus through your prism into aspects of deity, and in doing so you can work with deity in a way that is a little more mortal, a little more comfortable, and a little bit safer. And you can do things when you use aspects of deity that would be flat out impossible or completely dangerous to do otherwise, because deity is big. So we'll come back to that. The opposite side of humans of life is death. So both life and death together are one oscillation, and they are together the up part of existence and non-existence. So ghosts are death-based. They're a darker energy, and it aligns with death because of the chaos, because of the increase of chaos that turns a life into death and also turns a death into life. And so you see this this chaos with both existence, with both order and existence, and disorder and non-existence. It is both of them combined. The oscillation above the smaller oscillation, right? So it's an oscillation within an oscillation, right? Beyond infinity. So ghosts and spirits, that's the timeless transcendence. That's the collective unconscious. That's memory, past and future. Then you have, and present actually, by the way. So there's a part of you that's already dead. So we talked about that previously. We'll talk about it a little bit more again. What does it mean that death is timeless? We'll talk about that. Disorder is also timeless. Non-existence can't have a consciousness. Can't, because consciousness exists. So disorder only becomes conscious when it manifests into order, when it starts to exist. Okay, so disorder can exist, and it is an ordered thing that destructs with existing order, right? It is a destructively interfering ordered thing that results in disorder. So demons exist. They're the consciousness of disorder, but it only has a consciousness when it manifests into existence as disorder. Okay, disorder, it's a form of order in a sense. All things in the end serve existence. They serve God, right? All things in a sense serve God, because the universe is biased towards order. If it weren't biased towards order, then we wouldn't exist to talk about this. It would not have formed into an ordered process in the first place. It was complete chaos, and somehow it violated the need of the universe to trend toward entropy, and it just exploded out and formed a highly ordered process that could result in intelligent life. And there are many universes where that's not possible. And those universes are real in a sense, but not as real as ours, because we exist to observe it. So all of that, go back if all of that's like what? In one ear and out the other, or go back and watch the metaphysics, and I will justify all of that adequately. But for now, just remember that demons are the consciousness of disorder, and the void doesn't want anything. Okay? It's just the opposite of existence. It's non-existence. There's nothing in the void. There's nothing. Okay, so that's the consciousness of the universe. Now let's talk about what is the process of binding. How does it differ from actual spell work? And what is the shield work involved? Well, first you ground and center and attune, just like you would to create a spell. You'll cast circle, but in this case, it's not just the sacred circle that you use to keep your energy in and maybe the cone you visualize to send it out. No, it's got to be much more complicated than that, because you can't let the energies cross. You don't want to invoke something by accident that is one of these external energies. Once you start giving energy to these beings, they become very powerful. And they'll hurt you in lots of ways, even if they don't mean to hurt you. Even if it's just someone who loves you. You're binding human energy of a loved one. Well, that can have an impact inside of you that creates a feedback loop, that is negative or positive. You can internalize some of their traits in a way that is uncontrolled. And usually anything uncontrolled, that's chaos, that's bad, that's dark. We don't want to do that. It has to be deliberate, or it's not ordered. So that's the Wiccan way of looking at it. I'm a little more chaotic, and I'm inclined to kind of let chaos play out, but I live in total chaos. So I'm not going to advise that to most people. Most people, I'd say, deliberate. Everything you do should be deliberate. If you're a happy, enlightened person, you are acting deliberately. Okay, that's what I would say. And you're informed, and you know that you're acting deliberately because you take the time to know yourself. That is the foundation of shield work. Remember, thinking back about shielding. What does it mean to be good at shielding? Well, it really means that you know yourself very well. That nothing can come into your consciousness. You can't become aware of some outside idea without knowing that you're aware of it, without knowing how it will impact you, and without having some control over how it impacts you. That is the function of shielding, to protect yourself and your physical body as well, because people could put curses on you that cause you to trip or get hurt. If you piss off the fae, they'll cause you to stub your toes and all these kinds of things. So, a shield is about protecting yourself from happenstance, from your own clumsiness, from mistakes that maybe you just overlooked, the way that you worded something, from being a human person, in other words. And that's why you shield, because compared with the forces that you're giving energy to, humans are nothing. But without giving those forces energy, you have all the power. So the shielding is a way of retaining your power in the face of these vast forces that could otherwise overwhelm you, destroy your ego, really hurt you in serious ways, as we'll see. Okay, so then once you have the shield network in place, we'll talk more about that network in a second, you summon the external entity into the right level of shield. So if you're summoning a ghost because you're trying to do a divination session and you want that timeless energy, so you summon a ghost that you know, like an ancestor, you use bits of them, or like a hairbrush, right, or maybe something that was memorable to them. You put that in the outer circle, and then you have a circle in between you and that energy, because even if it's someone you know well, death energy is timeless and formless, and anything inside of you that is afraid or that has doubts that gets sent into that energy that you think is just your loved one could cause it to morph into something else. It could bring chaos. It could bring spirits that you don't remember fondly, that you have bad feelings towards. If you're not perfectly in control of everything your unconscious mind, your subconscious mind is doing, you're not perfectly aware of it, and you feed this energy something by mistake, even if you're aware of it, but you can't stop yourself because you don't have that level of control unconsciously. That's why you shield. Because then you're deliberately saying, anything that pops in my head about death as I'm doing this ritual is going to stay in my head. It's just an intrusive thought. It's going to pop in and be gone, and I'm focused. The shield is a focal point for you to use. It's a tool like anything else. And you use that to keep yourself safe so that you're not dwelling on things that may manifest this, that may cause this energy that you're feeding to form into something that could be hurtful, or that could be even just unforeseeable in how it influences you or the world or whatever. You want it to all be deliberate. Now, the next step after this, step 4, raise the internal energy that will represent the will and intent. You raise that up into an internal shield that keeps it in, but it's not a hard shield because you need to be able to send your energy out through it. It's something that you visualize to be porous or filtered, and the only thing that comes in is awareness of the energy outside, but not the actual energy itself. So it's a shield that facilitates communion, okay, of the outer energy, which we'll talk about those terms in a second. You raise your energy into the internal shield, will and intent, and then you shove that energy out, you burst it out, just like you would with a spell, through the energy in the outer shield, and it weaves into that energy and carries it back into its destination, another person or the universe itself, or into an item or a symbol, if that's what you're doing. Step 3 and 4 are sometimes reversed, and we'll talk about when that happens. Usually, you summon the external energy first because it's the most challenging, and once you have it there, you're like, okay, can I handle this? Am I a match for this? Can I raise enough energy to control this, to feed this entity, and still hold my own against it? Sometimes it's easier to just summon that external energy first, and then raise your will and intent and send it out all in one burst. And many people will keep a hard shield. They'll keep something that they'll summon the energy into the outer shield, and then they'll like open the slats so that they can see out, right, and see what they've summoned and see if it's the right thing. So doing it in order of 3 and then 4, as given on the slide, gives you a little more insight into what energy you've summoned before you actually invest the will and intent into it, which is a little safer, unless you're doing certain kinds of bindings, like working with deity, and we'll come back to that. So sometimes you swap 3 and 4, but usually you do it in this order. Then step 5, you burst the shield out. The will and intent is carried out and bound into the energy of whatever you're doing. If it's an item, it's in the outermost part of the room, like outside of the shields even. If you're binding it into, probably in the outermost shield. If you're binding it to a symbol, then, you'll just imagine it going into that symbol, like, maybe on the wall of the room, right? So it's like it's away from me, but it's still here present. So you could like visualize the symbol forming in the wall, or actually write it there with chalk or whatever helps do the spell. And you put the energy into that on its way out so that nothing is left. So the actual act of binding is like banishing. You banish all the energy away. And that's why you use a black candle, because binding and banishing are similar. And some people will use multiple candles, one in each circle, one that's the color of the will and the intent that they're trying to raise, that matches the spell associations from last time, one that matches the color of whatever they're trying to summon to represent what they're bringing into the circle. Then they might have one to represent the act of banishing all the way on the outside. Some people will literally draw the circles with chalk so that they are sure they will see it. They'll literally put circles there so that they're sure that it feels real and it won't break no matter what happens. So people take shielding very seriously. So I said that we would put up the same chart as last time, and it would make a lot more sense now. So look at this again, the shield networks. You've got the inner sanctuary, you've got your own like evocated or invocated shield, something that anything that comes in, you're aware of what it is. Even if you can't stop it from influencing you, you're aware that it came in and where it came from. That's the innermost shield. Your last defense is awareness. You can solve any problem inside of yourself if you know what's going on and why. So the last defense is, I will know if something influences me. And that's why the inner shield is usually invocated or evocated, however it makes sense to you. It's all one technique, really. Then you have the inner shield, right? The porous or filtered shield. That's where you raise your will and intent. And that's, that's going to be, you raise it out and you can see through it to the outer layer, but nothing can come in. And then you have the outer inner layer. So some people will summon the energy into this layer. Some people will kind of use it like a buffer layer where there's like nothing in it, but their inner circle will expand into it as they raise their energy before it bursts. Some people will omit like an outer inner layer and they just have the 3. It depends on how complex the binding is, how well you are focused and disciplined, how much you need to rely on a complex network of shields in order to do the working. And then you have that hard outer shield that contains the entire process. It contains the energy that you summon so that you don't become exhausted trying to hold on to all of these things. You contain it in an outer shield that gets burst as well when you push all the energy back out. Now you have to visualize all the shields, remember, as different colors, different textures. It's very important with binding that you use, you know, the inner shield is your aura or something and it goes one way, and then the outer shield goes the other way and it's a different color, or one is static and one is foam, or you have to visualize them being so distinctly different so that if something comes into you, literally you're in an altered state of mind, right? So if something comes into you, you will visually see it in your mind's eye. You'll see the wrong energy come into your body, and you'll know exactly that it happened because you're in this deluded state of mind where you can't not see the energy around you in your mind's eye as if it were really physically, you know, something that were happening, something that were a physical phenomenon. That is how strongly people perceive of these things in ritual many times. And that's the power of it, that there's no chance it'll come into you unaware when you're in the right state of mind to do the working. Okay, so that's your overview on binding, what it is, how to do it safely. Now we're going to talk about the different kinds of things that you can bind. Most of these things, by the way, this is very advanced magic. I teach it in a beginner course because people often will do it by mistake or not know that they're doing it, or run into problems with one of these entities or something like that. Everyone wants to work with ghosts going into Samhain. Everyone wants to work with spooks this time of year. So I cover all of it, but I don't go into the hows as much. You could figure it out easily if you're advanced enough to sit and figure it out, then you're good, do it, okay? But for people that are like, I don't know how much I want to get into all this, I'll be like, okay, practice this, try just this, and the rest of it, just be aware of this stuff, you know what I mean? Because it's not like it necessarily comes up all the time. There's pretty much nothing that you could do with binding that you could not do with life magic. It's just that life magic itself, energy raised from yourself, you know, it's slower. If you pray to the gods, that could be faster. So if you have a good relationship with divinity, that is the other side to this. You don't need to use binding. There are other ways to get what you need in life. But binding is the surefire way to get what you want. Otherwise, you have to settle for what you need sometimes. And there are lessons in that. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that. And I myself am the kind of person who does that. But a lot of people, that does not come easily to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. You are a divine being meant to express your will and desire. So use all of the tools available to you. And if binding is one of the things that helps you in life, now you'll know what it is and how to do it safely. Okay, so sigils as a form of binding. Sigils, these are techniques for beginners. This is something that is pretty safe for just about anyone, especially if you have someone more advanced and a mentor who can make a sigil for you that you can just practice using. It's great because you can charge up a sigil with your own energy, and you could put that energy in there and lock it in a timeless way. And then when they open that sigil, when they unlock it with the key, which again, if you recall, is usually some evocative phrase, something to get them to feel a similar feeling that you had when you put the sigil together. That's when the binding comes in. If you want to create a sigil for another person, you have to know that when they use that key, it's going to elicit the same feelings and not like trigger them by mistake and then they're vulnerable, okay? So you bind their energy into the outer layer of your shield, and you commune with it as you raise your will and intent, and you allow it to influence your emotional state to some small extent. And then you raise your will and your intent as you're designing the symbol, so you're sure that the symbol will work for them, that's something they can remember. And then you charge your energy into the symbol, and you send and you give that symbol back to them with the key, and now you're sure when they use the key that it will bring about the same emotional state, and the energy will flow forth from them in the intended way. So in order to create a sigil for another person and be sure how it's going to work for them, you have to use binding. So many times people will make life sigils, or they'll make sigils that people charge over time by like doing emoji spells and stuff. You'll see that happens. That's not binding. Not so much. I mean, everyone is charging the sigil themselves, so you're using energy from other people, and that may, affect how you design it or how you share it out, but it's not likely that you're going to sit and bind the energy of millions of people to your symbol in order to make sure it works perfectly for every one of them. No, at some point in that process, you accept the chaos, you accept the lack of control, and you say, I give this to you freely, and if you use it well, it will serve you. And then people charge it with their emotions, and it can become an evil symbol. I mean, look at how the swastika started as a symbol of love and illumination, and look what it became when people started to misuse it. So symbols can be corrupted, and that's the chaos component that comes along with these mass sigils and these emoji spells. They're really chaos magic. So people should keep in mind that when they're participating in those things in social media, it may not be harmless. It may attract chaos into your life, for better or for worse, depending on how you respond to chaos. So sigils, emoji spells, all valid ways to make use of magic. Just different kinds. The chaos, you can do chaos sigils that don't involve binding, like we just discussed. Chaos is, you don't have to manifest it from the void. You don't have to create a void of existence to use chaos. You don't have to give energy to chaos for it to work for you. You allow your ego to guide you as you practice non-thinking and inaction, and you sit and you have no relationship, and you experience a void inside of yourself, and have philosophies that are strikingly similar to like Taoism or Stoicism. So remember though that, use shields, even if it's a loved one. Summon their energy to you. Let it influence your feelings, your state as you design the sigil, and then you can give the symbol back for them. It's an excellent way to help protect a beginner while they're doing astral travel or having dreams and visions, while they're starting to wake their spirituality up. They have experiences that maybe can affect them in ways that are not always, desired or intentional. So a mentor creating a sigil for a beginner to use is an excellent way for them to be able to practice magic safely and feel what magic feels like, so that they are more confident in their own abilities to do magic and spell work, and they know when their spells are working. And that is also an educational technique in that sense as well. So there's a lot of great reasons to use sigils as a form of binding, even as a beginner. And you can get started, making use of them by making one for a friend, and just taking turns with each other and practicing that. And it's relatively not too dangerous, because even if you invoke your friend, it's like, if you're aware of what happened, it's not like it's going to hurt you, because that friend cares about you and you're aware that it happened, so you can undo it. Like, you can be like, okay, how is this going to influence me, and then just do some shadow work and be fine, right? So it's risky to bind humans, but it's not as risky when you know them well and you have a good relationship with them and you're sure of that. So that's the key. So between coven mates, it's a good technique. Okay, so that's sigils as a form of binding. Now let's talk about the Fae. So the Fae, that's the consciousness of spirit active, right? That's the consciousness of the elements combined as one, or just the elements broken out into four. Some people see spirits and things. Some people have creatures that align with spirit, many of them birds, like the phoenix. And then some people don't relate to that and just look at the four elements, and they don't see spirit as being independent of the four elements themselves when they combine into one. Some people say that spirit active is life, right? So the consciousness of spirit active are humans. And then dead humans are the opposite of that. So there's different interpretations. The four kinds of Fae, these are pretty standard though. So for the elements, it's like gnomes or dwarves, brownies, things that live in the ground and the hearth. Some people view them as being actual animals, so burrowing animals or groundhogs or worms, anything that lives in the dirt and that helps the earth to thrive. And for air, you've got the conventional fairies or pixies, flying, flitting creatures, and some people view them as the pollinators, so hummingbirds, dragonflies, butterflies, songbirds, with the music association that exists between music and air, so anything that sings. For fire, you've got salamanders,
why when they live in the water, I don't know, but they like to skirt around fire pits and they seek the warmth of the ashes. So they also are aligned with dragons. I think people didn't used to know that amphibians exist, so they just put amphibians and reptiles together by default. I really think that reptiles are more fire, and amphibians sometimes can be found aligning with water and can be seen as undines. Definitely dragons are more so fire than anything else, as well as snakes and lizards and salamanders, obviously in real life are associated with fire sometimes as well. I think it depends on the type of salamander too, because some of them are more readily in the fire pits and some of them don't leave the water. Frozen 2 has a salamander. Frozen 2 is a genuinely pagan story. It's not been Christianized, and it's probably one of the first truly pagan stories to exist and be popular for thousands of years. So it's really a testament to the changing times that you're allowed to be pagan in the open, honestly. It's a great movie. It's coming in season. Everyone watch it. Okay, water. Water has the undines and the mermaids, sea-dwelling creatures, things that help bring emotion or clarity of emotion. Many people will view them as whales, octopi, squids, or fish, anything that lives in the ocean or the water. Some see them, like I said, as metaphysical beings. Some see them as physical ones, so that's why you've got, so many choices. Some see them as being like, these are the animals within nature. I personally view animals as being pretty much like humans. I don't really see... I think that for the most part, when people think that an animal is less intelligent, that they just don't really understand the differences in how animals experience intelligence. Humans are a certain kind of animal, and we have certain kinds of ways to solve problems and go about life. And you could argue that it's better. You can argue that it's worse, because look what we've done to the climate, right? So no other animal would have done that. And so it just depends. Like, are you the kind of person that sees this energy as physical and you can't divorce it from the physical? Then maybe, when you see a worm in the garden, you're like, oh, the fae are with me. If you're like me, then you're like in cloud 9 and you're dancing around in a circle around in some naturally formed circle space with fairies dancing all around you, and you like physically see them and the sky is purple and everything is mushrooms, and then you live in a dream. Like, that's fine too. Okay, however you relate to this and visualize this energy or see this energy in nature, that's for you. That's your experience. I wanted to also mention that what it means to be of the fae, and we'll come back to this in another slide here in a minute. When someone is of the fae, this means that they can evoke these elemental forces. In their spells, they can use them, they can power their shields with them without binding fae. They don't have to actually give power to the energy around them until they are seeing physical, metaphysical beings in their mind's eye that appear physical to them. They don't have to spend that much time or energy on it, because they are like a fae themselves and they can just evoke like a fae. And the people that have that capability generally are people whose conception or an ancestor's conception has been caused by magic. A good popular depiction of that in the media is actually the BBC Merlin show that has Arthur's conceived by magic. So he would be of the fae, and that's why he has like superhuman abilities to like not get killed. You know what I mean? Like, it's just crazy how many times they get away with whatever they're doing. So that's like, of the fae, right? Conceived by magic. So we'll come back to that and why that's relevant when we talk about binding humans, because people that are of the fae do tend to have an easier time with binding, and they do tend to be skilled evokers, so it's relevant. So you'll see. So first, let's talk about what binding the fae is not. Just for clarity, when you are summoning the elements at the start of ritual, you're using the summoning pentagrams. You are bringing the energy into yourself, into the space that is already present, right? So you have representations of the elements on the altar, and you're just invoking that energy so that you have a timeless sense of awareness. And you're not really giving that energy form. You're not like bringing it into some concentrated essence that can be interacted with in some more kind of mortal way, like where you can like talk to it or have visions of talking to it, right? You're not interacting with it in that capacity. When you invoke the elements using the summoning pentagrams, which is a form of summoning, you're giving energy to the elements, but you're giving energy to the elements that are within and around your body, in your space. Like you're giving energy to it in a way that just allows you to experience timelessness. You're not really giving energy to it. You're more taking energy from it, if that makes sense. It's still called summoning because it is giving energy to it within yourself. So you'll hear people use the term summon to talk about both evocation and invocation. But most people, when they're talking about invoking deity, when they're talking about summoning deity, most people will say that they are doing an invocation, that they're invoking deity, because they don't even want to risk offending deity. With the elements, it's more colloquial. We're all just like, yeah, summon the elements using the summoning pentagrams, whatever. You're investing energy on it within yourself. So you can use the word summoning in multiple contexts. In this one, we're going to talk about what it is, for evocation. I'll give you the definitions formally when we get to the next type of energy. But for now, remember that when you're using, and you can do evocative quarter callings where you are also giving energy to, to manifest that. And you can also do evocative quarter callings where you're giving energy to the elements to manifest it, to summon it, to bring it into an embodied form that has more presence in the physical world. You can interact with it in a way that is more physical than it would have otherwise been. And people often will do that during May when the veil is thin, as a way of honoring the Fae and inviting them to their circle. People will do that if they're doing a particularly complex sort of spell and they need to bind the Fae. They may do an evocative quarter calling and then leave offerings for the Fae that they invite and have an altar to the Fae. So there are different reasons why you would do evocative quarter callings. I don't really cover it so much because it's more advanced. It's more witchcraft than Wicca. And Wicca is more about invoking the elements and has a very high level of respect for nature and sort of views nature in a way as divine and the Fae as divine. And I'd say that most Wiccans would ask them to be in existence, to be present. They ask that they attend, and they feel their energy within themselves and bring that energy into themselves to elevate their own awareness. So that's summoning the elements at the start of ritual. It's an invocation experience. We'll talk about invocation in the next 2 lectures. What is binding the Fae? That is when you are using the elements to do your will, to do your intent, to power your spells. You're summoning the energy and giving it form so that it can do your bidding in the world at large. Fae, they can be summoned. They're representations of life energy. They can be summoned into existence by generating energy of your own and then giving form to it. They are often just caught or trapped and found in natural spaces already summoned. Fae are things that get summoned very easily and very naturally. Even by animals can summon Fae. I've even met ravens that live in areas where the Fae protect their nests. I've seen this. So yeah, there are times when you'll run across Fae in nature already. And many people will just go Fae hunting and they'll find fairy circles and then trap the Fae. And the visualization is commonly like jars. I think it's in one of the Shrek movies where they capture all the little fairies in jars and they're lighting up the area with them. So jars are commonly used to visualize it, or bubbles, because their light can come out, but nothing else. Not the sound of what they're saying, none of their words, none of their dust can come out, only their light. So that's the kind of shield that you're talking about when you're talking about a porous or a filtered shield, right? So you're talking about visualizations that let some things out, but not all, usually porous, okay? You don't want anything to leave the container except what you designate should leave the container, because Fae are tricky. They're very tricky, and they're very powerful. They control all of nature. So, you could just commune with them. You can summon them and just talk with them and make a deal. Some people will bind them and force them to do their will, and the Fae view that as a deal also, and they expect something in return generally. And part of the spell should be making sure that you're giving them what you plan to give them, and acknowledging that bargain. Otherwise, they'll ask for something, anything, and you won't know what. Okay, and so that's like where those old tales come from about them coming from for your children and whatever. Okay, that's where it comes from. The idea that Fae make bargains, but it's not just evil things. Why do we give cookies to Santa Claus? Why do we give our teeth to the Tooth Fairy? All of those things are bargains with the Fae. Okay, they're bargains with forces of nature. So the Fae are everywhere, and we interact with them all the time across every culture in every sense you could think of. People just don't call it witchcraft for some reason. Okay, they don't like to call it that because they think witchcraft is some evil thing, but that's what it is to commune with nature. That's what it is to work with the Fae. Okay, it's to make deals with mythological creatures, and they're very fair. So if you uphold your end of the bargain, they will not hurt you, even if you bind them. But you have to uphold your end of the bargain. That's the key. And they're very tricky, and they'll hold you to your word, even while making it hard to do so. Like, they'll actively prevent you from doing it and try to make you fail to uphold your part of the bargain. And that's why a lot of people give the offering first. They're like, here's the cookies and milk. I hope you'll stop by, Santa. Right? So that is why they do that. Okay, so that's the Fae. General overview of that. Very common that you see people working with the Fae. Keep in mind that if you're powering your shield with any elements of nature, you could be working with higher consciousness, and it can be dangerous. So some people will power their shields with like crystals and stuff. If you've cleansed the crystal and it's on your altar and it's consecrated, that's fine. If it's just a rock you found in a stream somewhere, don't use that to power your shield. Don't do that. You don't know if taking it from that area pissed off a Fae. Okay, so then you start using basically that Fae's energy, because Fae are bound, by the spaces they dwell in to some extent. You start using that rock for your spell work, you're using that Fae's energy, really, in a sense. It's a part of the rock. It's a vibration that rock contains, remembers, if you will. And in doing that, you can constitute a bargain. They may ask for something, they'll want something from you. And when you give a Fae a cookie. So remember that it's, as much as possible, better not to power spell work with your shields or anything with parts of nature unless you have consecrated it and it's designated for that purpose specifically, or you've asked the Fae, you've summoned and communed with them and been like, can I take rocks from your stream? You have to have a good relationship with nature, even if it's just like an unconscious, like, okay, I feel good about this stream. I feel good about taking rocks from here. It feels right. It doesn't necessarily have to be an experience that you visualize or have if you're not a visual kind of person. That can happen as well, where it's just a gut feeling. Don't ignore that, okay? Be in tune with nature. Sometimes it doesn't make sense why you wouldn't be able to take rocks from a stream, but there's a reason. So remember that and listen to yourself. Okay, I'm going to try to rapid fire through these next two. Wiccans don't usually bind ghosts or demons very often. Ghosts are spirits. Also, sometimes they're conceived of as angels, beings that dwell on the higher planes of existence, who have lived before, or who will once live. There are angels that are not representations of living beings. They're not people who have once lived or will live. They're people that dwell in the upper Garden of Eden, or in the higher planes of existence. So those would be more deities or demons in essence. Some people conceive of them as angels, and that's okay. It's just important to keep in mind that the terms can be used differently by different people if you're exploring like angelic Wicca or something like that. Okay, so if it's death energy, it works like this. We'll come to chaos in time. When given energy by living beings, death, or what is really an absence of life, can take on form. It can be less formless and less timeless, and it can interact with the world in a way that is more concrete and direct. Living beings can give metaphysical beings power, and in exchange you get some of their power. That's how it works. A bargain. Death is timeless. So that means that ghosts do not act over time. They do not desire things. Desire is an experience over time. All of that exists in the confines of a passage of time. It's a very mortal way to relate to death. And it's okay. I mean, it's okay to speak that way. It's not technically wrong if it's really, if it's understood what's really happening. When a person feels like a ghost needs to pass on because that ghost died in some horrific way and has a mysterious, nobody has ever found the culprit or brought them to justice, that doesn't bother the dead person who is not experiencing time and has already reincarnated into their next life. That bothers the people who are still alive. That bothers the person in the home. And they're being bothered by the nature of that person's death and the emotions that they experience as a result of that. If that is negative and it has a detrimental effect on their life and the people around them, that is going to manifest that ghost in a way that can be malicious. So and then they might think, oh, this ghost needs help moving on. It's really the person who needs help moving on. It was Christian Day who said that most exorcisms he performs are really illusion acts that are designed to convince the people who are causing the problems for themselves that there's no problem, because then there won't be. Because most of the time that energies get out of control, it's really the feelings of the people, and really the people in the space need therapy or something to better relate to these concepts in order to not have these problems, because death energy is everywhere. Chaos is everywhere. So if you've got bad relationships with death and chaos, you're going to manifest these things in negative ways. And so that was he's a famous necromancer who I cite in my book sometimes, but I don't give him as further reading because he's not Wiccan, he's a necromancer. So you can use death energy to do spell work. And that's why you would summon it and bind it, because you can then do spells on a level that is timeless and formless, and you can affect the world on a grander, more subtler way. Now, you can manifest a ghost enough that it comes to manipulate physical things in a space. It's not like chaos. So we'll talk about what chaos looks like, but for ghosts, it's more like gradients in temperature. A space starts to feel cold. That can create a draft that causes doors to slam out of nowhere. That causes things to blow around or fall off of tables all of a sudden. Poltergeists, as depicted in popular media, would really be demonic. Those are demons. It can start with death energy and become demonic if a person has a negative experience with death, and that presence of death energy causes chaos within them and around them. Then it can become a manifestation of chaos. And because a lot of people have negative relationships with death, that results in a lot of people who have hauntings in their home winding up with demonic activity in the end. And that's why those activities are associated together. Now, ghost energy, death energy feels spooky. Feels like someone's looking over your shoulder, but when you turn, there's nobody there. But it doesn't feel sinister. It doesn't feel out to get you. It doesn't feel like it's trying to hurt you. It has no intention to hurt you unless you manifest it with that intention. And you can summon any ghost from any death energy. Death energy is formless. In death, we are one. So you can take the same absence of life and turn it into any spirit you wish. And that would allow you to interact with that death energy in a way that is a bit easier for you to comprehend as a mortal being. And it allows you to sort of query space-time. It allows you to do better divination. It would allow you to be possessed by a spirit if you wanted to do like a seance and allow that spirit to speak through you. It's very advanced. I'm not going to cover how you do it specifically, but it's with binding as a start. Now, we're similar in our biology, right? We have a similar relationship with the collective unconsciousness. Death means similar things for all of us. We grieve in similar ways. So we experience death energy and hallucinate and have delusions because of death energy in similar ways. And that is why, people will have ghost stories that many people can experience. And oftentimes being told the ghost story can enhance those experiences. And that's not because it's just the placebo effect, but it's because that's how death energy manifests into existence through our relationship with it. Okay, so what does it mean to manifest? Let's talk specifically. Let's define these terms I keep using. Communion. Same concept you see in Christianity when they do the communion. It's to teach children how to understand what forces they can invoke, what external beings they can look towards and work with for guidance without risk to themselves, right? So the whole point of communion in Christianity is to teach them, this is Jesus, this is God, they love you. These other kinds of energies don't, okay? So maybe it gets a little like bastardized by a need for control or whatever the church does. But the concept is sound, and it exists in every religion. Communion, okay? Experiencing sympathy, experiencing some distance between you and this external force. It's in the room with you, and you're aware of it, but you're looking at it. You can see it. But just because it's speaking doesn't mean that you hear what it's saying. It doesn't mean that you care, that it has some effect on you, right? It's there, but that's the extent of it. It's not doing anything yet. It's just there. That's communion. Okay? You sense it, you experience it, but you don't invoke it, and you're not directly influenced by it. You can still be influenced by communion. In fact, the Conjuring movies, by the way, if not for the over-the-top Hollywood theatrics, and the Annabelle movies as well, are not terrible depictions of demonic possession. The Exorcist in the second Conjuring movie, actually, she is affected by communion over time. She starts to have hallucinations, and the demons latch onto her in spite of her never actually invoking the demon. She still gets latched to eventually, because communion is still a way of being influenced by this force. It's just a less direct way where, but seeing the heinous things that demons can do influences her over time, and that gives the demons a way inside, that gives them a doorway, and she has to eventually leave the practice because of her emotional investment in what's happening with, because she's a normal human person, basically. So nobody can keep it up forever, because chaos is never-ending and vastly larger than any individual human person. But most of us give it a good fight for most of our lives anyway. But that's communion. Manifesting and summoning are really the same thing. It's giving energy to a metaphysical being, to a force of nature, so that it becomes a metaphysical being, so that it has some concentration of consciousness that can be interacted with in that more mortal way. Manifesting is what it's called when you do it by accident. When you're not aware of the fact that you're doing it. It happens a lot because people will say, I'm not afraid of ghosts. As a rationalization, they'll say that assertively because they truly are very afraid deep down, and they're like lying to themselves. Most people are like that. Most people have this shadowy self that they like to deny, that they like to deny, and things go into that shadow. And that's where the danger lies with ghosts, because if you have fear and you have unresolved issues with death or with loved ones who have died, and you are manifesting death energy into this world, you can actually manifest something that can torment you in a way that can be scary or frightening, and you can give it enough will to manipulate the physical world, and then that can cause even more fear, and then that feedback loop is really where manifestations come from. Summoning is the same. It's a feedback loop that you deliberately create, and that you control, and that you can end at any time. And that's the difference. The deliberation is the difference between summoning and manifesting. Okay, now keep in mind that for ghosts, these tiers come with different levels of symptoms. Okay, so if you've got communion going on and people are communing with death in a space, then they may smell scents on the air that remind them of their loved ones. They may have a feeling of familiar love, or that someone's watching over them. It generates a sense of hearthiness, that it's a bit more timeless and homey, because you feel like your loved ones are with you. Heaven on earth. the summer land, right? So there's ways in pagan history where people relate to death in ways that are a little more positive than just, heaven or hell necessarily, where you feel like they're with you. But in Christianity, you see that as well, with the idea that angels are watching over us, or, so you do see that as well. Especially in like some classic 90s movies, you'll see like with the angel showing up at the end, or the fairy godmother, that kind of thing. Okay, so when you have manifestation, you're seeing hallucinations. You have changes in temperature, flickering electronics. That's when you get the electric voice phenomena, and it's just manifestations into physics of nonsense, of energy that's not really there, of an absence of energy. It can still manifest into existence, and when it does so, it can be measured in very subtle ways. It can be perceived of very subtly, and that's when people would go ghost hunting, and that's what they would turn out. And it's not that the ghost needs help moving on, but they may still have to exorcise the space if they find something that is, harmful to the people that live there, because that exorcism will remove the trauma, the negative. We'll talk about why they would do that when we come to demons and when exorcism happens more often. But it's really just a severing of the timeless nature of the energy and the space, so that when people come into that space, they no longer dwell upon past memories of who's lived there. Instead, they're just making new memories. So you can do that with exorcism, which we'll talk about. Now, when you're doing summoning, you have an altered state of mind. You're having delusions. People think everything's floating. People think things are spinning around. Hollywood loves to depict that kind of experience in the most dramatic way possible, but in reality it feels a lot more like, whoa, like you're at a rave, or you're like, I don't know, on drugs. You're living, you're doing something that makes you feel alive, and that's like the death energy is attracted to that. Like death energy wants that life, so then you seed that life to the death energy, and that allows it to have some direct influence over you and come into being. And it has to be an archetype that you're summoning. You're not going to ever summon all of death. I don't even know what that would mean. That would probably mean that you're summoning some kind of chthonic deity, I would imagine. But so you're summoning specific people, and that's the same for manifesting as well, usually, or a couple of people if there was some mass, death event in that space. Also, it's the same symptoms when you summon versus manifest. It's really the same thing, but the difference is that it feels less spooky. It feels less lonely. It feels more comfortable to do a seance, to do a summoning versus a manifesting. Manifesting is usually the result of negative feelings. It can be the result of positive feelings, and then it might feel a little less spooky as well. That's really what it comes down to. The death energy feels more spooky the more afraid of it you are. It's really what it is. Okay, so binding ghosts, how to bind them, why to bind them. First of all, remember you can gain wisdom from death without binding. You can use past life regression and learn something about yourself and the wisdom inherent of your own being. And that does not involve binding, because your death energy is yours, even in life. And you can use hypnosis so that you can have visions that involve seeing outside of time, and use astral travel and that sort of technique. You don't have to actually do binding. You could put altars out to honor the dead without binding them, and in that way commune with whoever comes by and not have to summon anything. And those kinds of offerings, those kinds of things that attract death energy include offerings of spicy or sweet foods, coins and trinkets, things that are shiny and that have a memory associated with them, or that were passed down by relatives especially, musky incenses, skulls and bones, bits of the people you love. Some people will have actual skulls. That's more necromantic than Wiccan. Most Wiccans will use like owl pellets or representations of bone as opposed to actual bone. Items that were treasured by the person who's now deceased, that's very common in Wicca. Also, blood offerings and hand-pressed or lambskin paper can be used to attract the dead. It can also attract demons. So that's used more when people are doing like curses or blood oaths. So you'll see, they'll involve some chaos to some extent if they're doing that as well. It's not very common in Wicca, so it's a passing mention. So all you're going to do is decide in advance what kind of shield network you need. It's probably going to be something like we described previously. You plan how you're going to use the death energy, and who are you going to summon. Concentrate on it, very much visualize it, use the right kinds of offerings, use the right kind of shield visualization, draw it, use the right kind of space, decorate it accordingly, and be prepared to ground after the working, because death energy will exhaust you. It will take your life in exchange for death. That's the bargain. So grounding after, you'll be very demotivated. You'll want to just sit around and stare at walls, but you don't. You get up, you dance, you eat, you live. You have to do that. You ring bells, you make music. You have to do acts of life to ground. Otherwise, the death energy can latch onto you and make you feel depressed and make you feel not so good over time. It can make you just exhausted. It can have other effects. We're going to come back to all the detrimental effects at the end in a summary. Also remember that some people consider all forms of binding the dead to be dark magic. They view it as being ill-intentioned because death is formless, death is timeless, and when you summon a person who's reincarnated already, which happens immediately, if they're going to reincarnate, they reincarnate immediately. Even they could incarnate in the past, like your past lives don't have to be in order. You may have lived a past life in the future. You may have lived a past life on another planet. Like, there's not really any rules to how people incarnate besides you incarnate into a body that can sustain consciousness. But other than that, I mean, you don't know what someone's past life it looks like, right? So how they're going to be influenced by it. So it can be dangerous even to do past life regression. It can wake up things that involve doing shadow work. A lot of people will do it in the dead days and when they're doing reflective work anyway. A lot of people will view it as dark magic because you can sap the energy of the living being who you're binding. If you ever just wake up one day and you just feel sapped, maybe someone's binding your energy. Maybe you got to just wake up and shield and do some yoga and feel alive and you'll feel better. Maybe they're just sapping your energy by chatting with your past life. So that is one reason why some Wiccans will never bind ghosts at all, or they'll bind ghosts of people who they're pretty sure have not reincarnated because they were enlightened in some way, or great spirits, more so than just your average Joe that you remember from the neighborhood the next door over. they just depends on who you're talking to and how much they make use of necromancy in their practices. But most Wiccans don't make use of necromancy too much, and it's really just a seasonal thing, and it's mostly for communing with their loved ones who they may summon, even if it saps the life of that person in real life. But it's Halloween, that's why we all eat candy. We all feel sapped, that's the whole point. So that's the Wiccan way. But I gave you all of it just in case. Okay, so now trigger warning. Demons are disordered chaos. Demons are the consciousness of disorder when it manifests into existence. They are entropy. Demons are the tendency of the world to move towards equilibrium, in which movement is more chaotic and less ordered, and that will eventually bring it to a point where our universe cannot sustain life, and it's all just black holes. But we're going to be living in some other version of the universe in some alternate reality by then, I imagine. So it won't matter. Anyway, so demons they possess living beings. They seek to possess living beings so that they can inflict the maximum loss of innocence. They are trying to destroy your faith in higher order. They want you to believe that things do not have a purpose and that everything is just dreadful. They want you to feel existential dread, because that is how they erode order and further disorder. And the void does not want this, okay? The consciousness of disorder doesn't exist. It wants nothing. It is nothing. But once it manifests into existence, it seeks disorder. And that's why the universe could come to exist at all. Because existence naturally desires to be. And non-existence desires nothing. So one of those things is a little bit greater than the other, in a sense. So that's disorder. And it is inherently evil. If left to its own devices, disorder will try to possess people and force them to do horrible things for reasons that nobody can understand, that are so profoundly confusing that people come to believe there is no higher order. And that's what demons are like if left to their own devices. But you can impose your will and your desire onto demons, and they will have to do it. And that will and that desire may very well be something positive that brings about a higher order. Usually it's something selfish. That doesn't mean it's bad. But the people who summon demons to do their bidding are therefore not inherently evil. They may be doing evil things, and if they summon the demons badly, they will certainly become more evil over time. Working with chaos and summoning demons comes at a cost because they're timeless. So you can't unring a bell. Once you've summoned the demon, it is attached to you forever. It is with you always. And if you bind lots of demons, that can manifest in a disordered existence. If you just do it with a couple of big ones, and those are your archetypes, and those are the demons you work with, it's really not as dangerous as people think. It is dangerous, and it really just depends on the kind of person who's doing it. Why would you bind a demon when it's so dangerous and you could achieve the same ends with life magic if you really wanted to? Well, so binding a demon does allow you to do things that otherwise you couldn't do. I mean, with the Fae, it's more things like wishes. It allows you to make a wish. Wishing on a star is, in fact, a classic way of interacting with Fae, where you make a wish. Jinns, on the other hand, genies, are usually seen as being more like demons. Sometimes they're seen as being spirit Fae. Jinn often will maliciously interpret what it is you want from them in order to harm you directly. Like, they will just be like, you have to be so specific with what you ask of them. So they're in a gray area between Fae and demons. Demons have the capacity to override the will of many people. They can just take threads, even threads that have already been woven, and reweave them. They can change the way people remember their own past or relate to it. They can change the way people act. They can cause people to do things for no reason that serve the will of the person who bound them. I've seen people use summoning demons for all kinds of things. It's usually ended well because I've helped them. The people that do it on their own and that don't work with demons before they try this, and they're just desperate and they're very emotionally attached to the idea of the demon doing their bidding, it gets them in trouble. You got to know what you're doing, and I'm not going to teach you how to do it. If you want, though, however, you could do the same thing as this using chaos. It's a little bit safer. It's not much safer. But you don't have to actually summon a demon in order to make use of chaos. Chaos is the force that shifts order to disorder and back again, like we said. And it's what unifies demons and deity. Both demons and deity work through chaos. They work by making a person spontaneously want something different one day, and they just don't know why, but they do. And that's how it works. And suddenly they do that to enough people in enough places, and everything changes. So in effect, chaos is really the fact that what's a cause and what's an effect doesn't matter in the end. In the moment, something might seem like a cause, and then you realize later it was an effect. Or it may seem like an effect, and you realize later that it was a cause, right? Everything leads to something. Everything trickles on, right? So chaos theory, like in math and in, you know, the occult world, is very similar, right? So this idea that one small thing can really trickle down and affect a lot of things down the way, you know. So chaos exists within and around you. It's an oscillation between order and disorder. It is the fabric of space-time. You do not have to give it energy to manipulate it. You manipulate chaos, the fundamental fabric of space-time, by not being attached to it, by non-thinking and inaction. Nirvana. Okay, you can influence chaos when you're in a state of detachment. So that's why religions preach that, and why they think that that's the ultimate power, right? And in a way it is. But it also means, having that detachment means seeing divinity, you know, being in line with the higher order of things, and you realize that you don't really even have a desire or a will to act, right? So that's why you see that wisdom becomes power and power becomes wisdom, because it's really just one universe experiencing. It's really just one, okay? So you can redirect chaos instead of summoning it. And if you do that, you know, then you're not really working with it in a way that's quite as dangerous. You can still cause inadvertent things to happen, and then you can wind up, you can attract more chaos, and then you wind up having a negative experience as a result of that chaos. And if you're not capable of, you know, being an ordered person in the face of that chaos, if you're like, I shouldn't have done this, it's the worst decision I ever made, and you allow this to fester, then it could become a negative experience. It could even become a demon. And that's what we call internal demons. And lots of people create demons from nothing, okay? So Cthulhu is everywhere. Cthulhu is calling. Don't suck. But if you do suck, and that happens a lot, and people run into this a lot, then you wind up in a possession scenario. So never invoke chaos. There's no reason to invoke it. It's not like death energy, where you might want to allow an archetype of death to speak through you to help bring peace or knowledge to someone. No, there's no reason to give a demon any ounce of your being. Don't let them in at all. They will try to make you think that they're your deceased loved ones. They will trick you. Don't listen. Don't believe them. You know, be very careful when you're working with any external energy, because it's all really a manifestation of chaos. Most of all, chaos is the fundamental force. So when you're doing any kind of magic, you're doing anything that doesn't involve the energy inherent in your own being, then you're working with this force. So it's, you know, it's tricky, and it can cause you to become possessed by disorder, which then leads to people doing things that are disordered, and that is really what demons want. They want to use your body to do horribly disordered things, so that it erodes people's faith in higher order, and it makes them say, God could never allow something like this to happen. And really it's because demons are a manifestation of our will and a divorcement from God, right? So that's what they say in Christianity as well. So that's all in line, actually. Okay, so partial possessions, or a latching, is what happens when a demon just kind of hooks onto a person or an object or a place. People often will bring a demon into their lives by obtaining some new object or meeting some new person that has issues with demons, or they'll just have some chaotic event happen, and then they'll have a bad relationship with that chaos, or some trauma, some kind of experience that then creates that feedback loop that results in the chaos building and being, you know, stronger. And when this happens, you see changes in how that person interacts with the world, and their behavior and their general mood, or their abilities to accomplish things. Addiction to substances as well. Burns, cuts or bruises, especially that happen overnight, that have no explained origin or no understanding of where they could have come from. Things moving around or disappearing, or like reappearing somewhere else, but nobody remembers moving it. Nightmares, lack of sleep, dissociative fog and symptoms, lights blowing out, just chaos in general, like symptoms of chaos, like manifest into your life, basically. Those are all signs that there's a demon come into your home or your space, or that's latched onto someone, that probably needs to be exorcised if you want to prevent it from progressing further. Now, possessions can be reversed until they are complete. It's all or nothing for the demon. Until the soul is destroyed, the body can be returned to order and can be healed, as long as you exorcise the demon and sever the ties between the demon and that person, which we'll talk about in a moment. First, what happens if it's not identified that a person is in a possession scenario in time, and they wind up, in a full possession scenario where the demon wins the body and they can directly act in the ordered physical world? Well, the soul is destroyed or dissolved or ripped apart, however you want to think of it. I mean, it's a metaphysical process. So if the soul could feel pain, I'm sure it would be painful, and it's eternal in a sense because it exists outside of time. It happens in the past, present, and future. All that person's past lives, everything to do with that person ceases to exist in memory, and they can only be remembered for their evil. They can only be remembered for what the demon did through them. And that would be hell. It's not a place. It's not a place, but a state of being. And hell would be something that you don't get to just by making lifestyle choices that are in line with the way that you were born or the way that you were created. I mean, the truth is that very few people go to hell. It really happens in extreme situations. And those are kinds of situations that are very obvious. The symptoms grow very intense as the possession builds, and you see new personality traits, new values, new patterns of speech, changes to the tone and the sound of the voice, and just like the facial expressions, like the way that they even speak or interact, get just perverse. Some become more violent and some become less violent, and it's really just like like a storm that back builds, right? Like some people just like get pent up until they explode, and some people just explode. Memory loss is common. Memory loss and dissociative fog, and so if you've ever seen like the Annabelle movie where she like wakes up and the room is suddenly just has crazy chaos and there's words written all over the walls and all this, well, minus the over-the-top theatrics, that's a pretty accurate depiction of reality, because she would just have gotten up and done all of that and written on the walls and made everything crazy and spooky and perverted, and then she would have just not remembered it and had a fit or fainted, and then when she woke up just been like, whoa, this is freaky, like look at all this, right? So they don't show it like that because it's spookier, to show it from her perspective of waking up in this state. And that's the point, right? They're trying to make you feel that dread. They're trying to make you understand that dark emotion. Why we do this as a ritual, I don't know exactly. Probably because perverse things exist, and experiencing it in some small part helps us cope with it later. It helps us deal with trauma. I don't know, But the sad ending is when a person achieves that full possession, or when a demon achieves that and wins the body. And some people, their last act of defiance is that their body itself just refuses to permit the possession. And those are the people who just die, or just like have unexplained death, or that commit suicide, right? So like she's trying to convince herself to kill herself and her baby, and the Annabelle, I believe, right? So it's like demons are trying to cause people to do things that shock people, and that's why if there's a demon in a home, they latch on to the most vulnerable, the most, pregnant women are not sleeping well, and they're the most vulnerable, and they're also the ones the demons would want to possess the most, because hurting them causes the most. So if a person can't be possessed, they just sort of refuse, then they'll die in some unexpected way. Or some of them, if people are already ill to begin with, like for instance, people that cut themselves, like that goes contrary to the survival mechanism, like the survival instinct that is the bias towards order. And when you cut yourself, it's an act of disorder. People will do it because it helps them feel closer to death. They feel like they're making a sacrifice. But, you know, if you're going to prick your finger and drop some blood into a copper cauldron on a new moon, and that's how you commune with the dead, and you use their magic to, you know, to feel alive, I mean, that's fine, that's healthy, right? But if you're like hurting yourself in some way, you're actually risking death, you're acting with disregard for your life. You know, you have to live like you're alive, even if you're doing death magic and you like to feel dead. Do it. Be yourself. Be dark. Be brooding. But if you're doing things that are perverse or perverted, then you are, you know, manifesting chaos in that, and that is a dangerous thing. So when Christians are like, people that commit suicide don't go to heaven or whatever, like, there's a basis in reality in all of these extreme interpretations of this truth. But the truth of the matter is that doing things that are perverse or that are against the natural order of the universe to tend towards order, doing things that further disorder, is, you know, what is inherently evil in our conception of what it is to be evil. So the people that can't reject and that don't have that ability to refuse to act, and you know, they wind up on death row. They wind up in documentaries about evil people. They wind up where their names are synonymous with evil, and or they fall very, very ill. The ones who are already ill fall more ill and wind up in mental institutions or nursing homes where they kind of just like creep everyone out or are like heavily medicated and they just live out their days that way. And it's not pretty. It's really not. Not every person that does evil things is possessed by demons, but most of the people that do truly heinous things are demonic activities involved. And it's well known that, for instance, people like Adolf Hitler dabbled in the occult, and it's probably safe to say they did it unsafely because they didn't have any of the writings about chaos or any of the philosophy that came out of the late 1900s. So I think it's safe to say that some of the largest heinous things in history that we remember were perpetuated by demons, actually. So that's something that, I don't know, maybe is controversial, but that's the sad ending. The happy ending is one where the demon possession is reversed. It's caught in time. It's reversed. It's reversible right up until the full possession. Trying to exercise a full possession is exceptionally dangerous. It will almost always result in both the exorcist and the party becoming completely possessed and possibly even trying to kill each other or everyone present. You can't exorcise a fully possessed person. There is a point at which a person just is taken by the demon and they really don't have a soul anymore, and if you exorcise them, they might just die, or they might just be like a shell. They would be in a coma or something. So there are times when it's too late for an exorcism, but up until that point where it's a full possession, it's not too late. And that's why you have to just remember that as a physical being, as an embodied being, you have more power over them. In this ordered universe, they don't technically exist. And at any time, you can banish a demon to the void. You could do that at any time by experiencing strong, rational, ordered feelings, being deliberate and using deliberacy, using order and highly ordered things and symbols and names that represent concepts of order, names of gods. You can feed this positive, ordered emotion to a demon, and it will annihilate the demon. It will just, because it can't withstand order. So order is therefore used to curse and banish disorder to the void after a demon is summoned. And if the demon has been manifested or latched onto a person, you can do that to save a person's soul as well. Exorcisms also involve that timeless component that I mentioned. You have to sever this timeless force from the time-bound being. You have to sever it completely. You have to remove any memory of what happened. You can also see that depicted in the Frozen series, which is interesting. You have to remove any memory of what happened, as well as any trauma from that possession, not just in the person who was possessed, but in all of the people that were affected by the person who was possessed. And you do this, you remove the timeless chaos from a person that is detrimental to them by replacing it with a positive timeless chaos, deity. Okay? So you just repurpose the chaos. You can't really get rid of it. You just repurpose it. And then eventually it could reduce over time. But it might just stay, and they may just be a very faithful person after that. But this is why we peddle religion to people that are addicts, that are in jail, right? This is why we give them religion, because it counters the demons that cause them to do the things that they did, which could, do it in a state of partial possession, and then they're just possessed partially, and it doesn't progress after that, because they were removed from the scenario that caused the possession in the first place, or whatever, right? The idea of taking someone away from a dysfunctional situation is not a bad idea. It's just that we don't really care as much about rehabilitation as we should, and we don't always approach it from the right perspective, because religion is so dogmatic, but also exceptionally helpful for the disordered and the dysfunctional. So if it was less dogmatic, it would be easier to prescribe religion to the people who need it. So that's why I argue for universalism, and I talk to inmates a lot, and try to help them find that order within themselves and the world around them, because that is how you counter the demons. Now remember that exorcisms can be just as dangerous as summoning demons themselves. It's very difficult to do an exorcism on yourself, and it's just, you don't mess with demons, and you don't mess with demons alone. It may take time for some people to fully recover after an exorcism, that the bad habits linger longer than anything else, but usually the person will just fall very, very ill, and they'll just be sick for a time, and often they'll throw up a lot. Sometimes they'll throw up blood. It's not clear, maybe there's just a lot of inflammation, but it's not really clear where it comes from. It's not like a lasting problem. They just get very ill, violently ill, and then they sleep for a long time. They usually sleep the illness off, and then they wake up and they're like groggy, and they're not that hungry, and they're kind of depressed, maybe kind of like they don't have a direction in life, but they're obviously feeling better, and they're more themselves than they've ever been. So the people around them are usually like, oh wow, you look so good, you're more yourself than you've ever been. So then that helps to generate the positive feedback loop. So again, exorcisms are things that can't happen in a vacuum. Like, they're only successful if the people who love this person are going to love them truly, and the circumstances that gave rise to whatever demon possessed them, if they are internal demons that came to overwhelm them, those circumstances have to be rectified as well. So a lot of the healing process is going to involve everyone, and not just the person who was latched onto specifically, but everyone that's affected by them or that's in the household. Okay, so that's enough of all of that. I promised these would be shorter, but this one is a little bit long because it's a lot to get through in terms of covering it comprehensively. The next few slides are the kinds of binding that are more common in Wicca, that you see a lot. Wiccans don't usually work with the darker aspects of creation, so I told you around Samhain they might call upon ghosts, but they almost never bind them. They rarely summon ghosts. You'll see some life-based sigils like we talked about at the beginning, and that's actually one of the exercises, but rarely are they used for cursing, or do they involve binding beyond, like, okay, my friend and I are making like bracelets for each other. That, love, expressions of love and light. That is what we do in Wicca. So let's shift back to the love and the light, which will perpetuate, which will continue into the next lecture when we talk about invoking these same forces. But first, let's talk about what it is to evoke the energy of other humans. Okay, what does it mean to bind a person? Well, first of all, it can be very complex or very simple. Depends on what you're doing, and the risk varies accordingly. Like we gave you an example at the beginning that's very simple, that's not very risky. Well, now we'll talk about some more complex examples. This risk is influenced primarily by a person's knowledge of themselves. If you have a lot of knowledge of self and you don't have a shadow self, at least in the moment that you're doing the spell, so you have to take the time to be aligned and at peace with yourself and detached. And if you can do that, even if the rest of the time you do tend to repress things, if you can just like take stock of that and then do the spell, That's what's required to do successful binding of another person. So if you can't do that, if you're not able to like put yourself aside, or you're not able to be aware of yourself in that way, then you're just not ready to bind other people's energy, and it's not safe to try. But if you can do that, you're at that level of awareness, you meditate a lot, and you've got a handle on this, high spiritual intelligence, whatever the case may be, you're ready for it, then, you know, so that's how you know. But this is a kind of technique you would try as an acolyte, you would master within a Wiccan path. Because you can use this kind of binding for all kinds of things. You can borrow traits and skills from people, and create illusions. You could create poppets, which are items that are enchanted with another person's energy, and then you can do sympathetic magic to the poppet, like healing energy, or you could, you know, curse them if you wanted to, and you can, you know, do spell work that trickles over time with that item that you've enchanted with their energy. So that's both enchanting and binding at once. And you can also bind people from themselves. You can alter a person's course. But you can also just bind the energy to your space so that you can commune with it. And that way, like if you're doing a remote reading for someone, you're doing divination for someone you've never met, you can bring their energy into your space so it feels like they're in the room with you, which allows you to interpret their cards better, because then you like know what language to use, and you sort of get a cue off of them, and you can read them like you would if they were in the room with you. So that's why you might bind a person's energy. In Wicca, you see people do that all the time. You see people do it for rituals. There's a lot of remote covens these days, so people will use this kind of technique. We use astral travel, which is a little similar, but everyone has to do the work themselves. Some covens, the High Priestess will bring everyone together because it's difficult for the beginners to know how to join them. But we're not really a group for beginners. We're a group for solitaries. So most people in our lineage have a lot of experience, and they just need to learn how to formalize their understanding of it. So that's different. Okay, so remember that there are side effects to all different kinds of binding. In this case, the side effects are often permanent because it's very difficult to separate yourself from another human. It's very similar energy, very similar vibrations. If you let another person's energy into yourself, it can really cause just dissociative symptoms and depersonalization, and it can cause the development of, you know, personality disorders and self-worth issues, which result in obsessions, which could result in possessions down the line. So it's like it turns someone into like a ticking time bomb, or just like kind of a mess in terms of like they can't really know themselves or understand themselves. It can give people depression, lack of direction or motivation, and it really just makes people mad. Like it makes people like crazy because they just can't know who they are anymore, and they don't know how to value themselves anymore. So binding other people can result in suicidal ideation, but like not because of like some I hate myself, I should, you know, die kind of. Usually it's like they're so mad, or they're just like they just feel like there's no cure, and that there's no way out of it, so there's no other choice. The kinds of people that have like the more like lack of self-worth, it tends to manifest more as like depression, or like anxiety, or like even like borderline or narcissism. It tends to manifest more as like just a self-obsession. And that can lead to like demons, which can lead to ideation. But the ideation doesn't usually come directly as a result of that dysfunction. It's usually more a result of like curing the madness, because it can make people very mad. If they do this wrong a lot, especially. If you do it wrong once or twice, it's probably not going to be as severe. That's why it's like, yes, beginners can do this, because if you're working with someone who is aligned with you and their energy is very similar to yours, it's not likely to cause all this stuff. It's more likely to just be like, okay, I feel a little bit of a lack of direction. I'm a little distracted. I feel a little different. Feel a little off, right? If you're doing binding and you're feeling like that, stop and practice your shielding and go back to your basics, because that's a sign that you're not doing it correctly and you're going to get in trouble. So that's how you can do it as a beginner, because if you're just doing it safely with people you love and you're mostly aligned already, it's not that much of a risk. It's only a risk when you're doing it with people that are very willful, that have desire of their own, who maybe hate you or who you have strong feelings about, right? So it becomes difficult to do this kind of working depending on why you're doing it and what you're doing and who's involved and how many people you're binding and all of this, okay? Burst bindings are the most common way of binding another human because what happens is that you just like get exhausted by holding on to that much energy that's not yours. It's difficult to work with energy that's not yours. So if you lose focus, you can invoke it by mistake. So that's why you just bring it in like for a short time, raise your energy and send it back out, and you do it all in a burst. You don't try to trickle it out or like weave it as it goes too much. You just kind of like count on your energy to wrap around theirs as it goes back, or visualize it as like waves or something. Like you have a visualization that carries it all away while it interweaves with each other. Trickle bindings are possible as well, and like that is an example of the poppet where you bind the poppet with a burst, but then you use it over time, so that's like a trickle spell. And also crystals are commonly used here as a form of grounding, so they may use like a white high resonance crystal to help attract the life energy of the other person and help them focus on that, and then they'll hold a black crystal in their other hand so that if something goes wrong and they feel like, they're starting to feel like, why am I doing this? Right? That would be a sign that they're having that emptiness or that lack of direction. So they would just then put that whole energy working into the black crystal immediately and then just like throw it away, throw it out of the circle, signify, banishing it, so that it's like, okay, grounded. Nope, we're done with that spell. It wasn't thought through well enough and I've got to try again. Okay, so that is how people might do binding of other humans. However, other humans have just as much power as you do, and they can decide they don't want to be bound and put up defenses, and that's when magical combat might ensue. So binding can be used defensively or offensively, and either way it's combative, right? So if you're binding another person, you're being combative, but you can do it to protect yourself, or you could do it to hurt them, like for vengeance or for defense, right? So there's many reasons. You can also do it in a way that protects them by altering their course so that they no longer do harmful things or follow around people that do demonic things or whatever. Like you can help a person be a better person with binding, and then it's not really necessarily even combative, but it depends on whether or not that person is receptive to your help. So energy is attracted into the outer shield, just like you would for the other kinds of binding, and even in magical combat, that's the case. You never like take the fight to them, because it's dangerous to weave your energy directly into them. If you are projected into a space, anything in that space can be invoked, and that's why astral travel can be dangerous, and why we use sigils when we do astral travel or when we lucid dream, because you can invoke things in your sleep in alternate realities that like influence you in reality. It can be dangerous. So you also can't really shield yourself fully when you're inside of another person. You can't just like cast your energy like you would. I mean, they'll know you're there for one thing, but also it's just difficult to do. You can't just, you're in their energy. Like your awareness is inside of them. So you can't just do what you would do in your own space. It's more difficult. So when you bring their energy to you, you can control exactly how much energy comes and what kind of their energy comes, and if and you can control it all, and you can put the energy around you. And because their energy is kind of as strong as you, or a similar strength, and it can be very difficult to keep it out of yourself once you've attracted it, most people will, in this case, swap the third and fourth, like we talked about earlier, and they'll raise their energy and their intent and will first, and then summon the energy of the other person into the outer layer. That ensures they can't invoke anything because their energy is pushing out, right? So it's like the equilibrium that a star achieves, and why a star doesn't collapse on itself because of the gravity is because of the force of the explosion. So that's the same idea that's used here in magic. So the more convincingly theirs the new intentions are that you send to them, like the better you can commune with their energy and then weave your energy into it on the way back safely, The better you can do that, the more successful the binding. The less likely that they're going to know that they have been bound. They may know that they've been targeted if they're really skilled and they shield and they can detect it. But they probably, like, if you're really good at binding, they probably won't know by whom or the exact nature of the influence. It may take them a lot of time to, like, sit and sort through themselves and be like, okay, what do I really believe and feel on this matter? Because now I'm just, like, infected by this person's in my head, you know? So one thing that they can do in that case, bindings can be redirected into objects and then destroyed. And then, like, the thoughts and impulses can be quarantined. Like, you can just be like, okay, don't make any decisions. Don't do anything at all. Just, like, sit and be and just, you know, meditate and just be in your headspace and just rest and sleep and think about it. Slow down. And usually in that way they can be cleansed of the negative binding and find a way back, you know, to themselves and what they desire. So magical combat is really just like a battle of wills, and whoever knows themselves and reality better wins. Whoever is the master of knowing is the one who usually can win the magical combat. So that's something, you know, that people will engage in from time to time. Less so in Wicca. Mostly in Wicca it's defensive, but you do find people in Wicca who believe the right thing to do is curse your adversaries. So you do see that. Now, another thing that can happen as a result of invoking the energy of another person is something called psychic vampirism. It can also happen just naturally or as a result of trauma, that a person like just can't function without the energy of other people. They just, like, need it and they get addicted to it and they form obsessions for people. And it can often manifest as, like, narcissism and personality disorders like that. People with toxicity issues. And vampires often are the victims of abuse. Like, it's not always their own fault. Sometimes it's a result of magical incompetence. It's also more common in people who are of the Fae, which is why I wanted to mention it. And it's because people who are of the Fae have an increased skill with evocation, and it's just a general tendency towards, like, larger definitions of themselves because they are one with the forces of nature. So, duh. And for these types of people, like, they can pull energy from the sun or the moon or some other aspect of nature and use it to, like, feed themselves without it constituting a bargain or a contract with the Fae. Because they are one with the Fae, so it's really their own energy in a sense that they're using. And that's sort of like being a vegetarian, right? So some of them will feed on this kind of energy instead, and they'll do often daily rituals to whatever this is. Like, they'll do a different ritual for each phase of the moon or something like this, because that's just how they stay charged, and then they don't go for the energy of the people around them, and they're less toxic. So vampires can batter away at shields, and even if you're good at shielding, I mean, it can be exhausting just having them batter away at you. And it can just be very difficult to be around people that are just, like, uncontrolled energy vampires. And it's one of the side effects. It's one of the side effects of, like, magical combat gone wrong, or, like, invoking human energy. And, you know, if these things go wrong, you can become someone who depends on the energy of other people. Because of, like, the self-worth and other issues and dissociative issues that can come out. So they can start to mimic other people as well. Like, if they have DID, they can start to have alters that mimic the people around them and stuff. So it's like, you know, that kind of loss of, like, themselves. And they become very dependent on the people around them. It's difficult to develop this condition. It's difficult to develop it. It's not very common. It's common enough, but there are people that have personality disorders and are toxic who just have trauma and are not vampires, okay? And so it's common, but it's not so common that every single person with a personality disorder is a vampire or something. And it's more influenced by the stars. You see it a lot in people that have Scorpio and Capricorn in their stars, and that it's easier for people with those qualities to develop in this way. Okay, last but not least, we're going to talk about binding deity, ordered chaos. So deity may be bound for the purposes of things that are in line with divine purpose. It has to be divine. If you're doing it for selfish reasons, mortal reasons, mundane reasons, then you are going to wind up hurt. You cannot override deity's will, and trying to do so will probably destroy you. So it's not a good idea to try. But people do bind deity for their own purposes when those purposes are things like fostering better relationships with beginners and divinity by giving them a way to interact with divinity that is mundane, right? They can mimic divinity, they can elude to divinity, and the people in ritual will see divinity standing there and feel the will of divinity channeled through this person, and that furthers divine purpose by helping these people form a connection with divinity and have their own connection with deity inside themselves. So it's a form of empowerment that serves order. So when this happens, the will and desire within the witch that keeps the deity out of their inner selves, that protects their ego, that will and desire is divine energy itself. So they invoke divinity first, which is the whole next 2 lectures is talking about invocation. They invoke the divinity first into the space and then into the witch. And then she can take that invoked energy, swirl it around and let it change her and inspire her, and then direct it back out. And it comes through her in a more mortal way. So really, divinity is using her in a sense, but divinity has no desire to do that. So she has to use divinity so that divinity can use her. And it allows for conscious deity work. It allows you to interact with deity directly, and it's a key part of forming that divine persona. You often see it done by leaders for leaders in initiation rituals for leaders. And the ego is suppressed, so there's like memory loss often. The High Priestess does not remember after the fact any of the conversations that occurred for the most part. And that protects the ego. So after it's done, she's just like, I did what? So remember that this is not a beginner technique. I'm not really teaching you how to do it. It's something that you would experience with a High Priestess. And if you are watching this as a leader, you probably are ready to start doing this. But people, for the most part, if you're watching this as a beginner, it's something you'll see other leaders do in Wicca, and you're probably not ready to try it yet. So just remember that divinity is big, divinity is great, and it will destroy you. It will destroy your ego to pieces, and you will just lose your ability to perceive a physical reality. If you invoke divinity as a whole, the all-conscious, you'll be struck dumb, as they say. A loss of individuality and ego death occurs. Delusions, rampant, grandiose delusions of grandeur, coming to believe for themselves that they're gods or that they do war with gods. It's very much an expression of narcissism and self-absorption. It's often permanent and irreversible because they just can't be convinced that anything went wrong. And the ego can grow beyond containment, beyond sense, beyond any chance for knowing the boundaries of it or becoming self-aware. And it can lead to schizophrenia. It can lead to dissociative disorders. It depends if a person is prone to conspiracies or paranoia or how they try to cope with what's happening, because it really is just an overwhelming loss of self that can cause, all sort of trauma response in people. It can be very dangerous. So it's something only done by people that have a very good relationship with divinity and they're sure that the deity is in line with what they're doing and that they're completely aligned, mind, body, and soul. And then they can call this energy down safely and use it to help their beginners form their own relationships with divinity. And then when we get to invocation, we'll talk about how you can start to form your own relationship with divinity in a more intimate way, and you can learn how to do it safely so that you can try these more advanced techniques down the line. Now, we call it aspecting. When it's done in a ritual, it's done for an aspect of deity, because the all-conscious is a dangerous thing to aspect or to evoke. So, we call it aspecting. We only work with aspects of divinity. We're making use of those particular aspects because of the purpose of the ritual. You know, like for instance, I went to one where the High Priestess aspected Categorizing, and she just was like, it was Categorizing. It was like speaking to Categorizing. It was like nothing else I've ever experienced, and it's just so remarkable, and it moves you. And it was a Samhain ritual that was an audience for the dead, and it was a dumb supper, and that was the whole point of it, was to have your audience with Categorizing after just being in silence and doing your challenge and all this stuff. So, you know, that's how you would see it done in Wicca. And it's really just, you're borrowing the skills and traits and knowledge from a person, right? Just like you would when you're binding a human person, you know, but this time it's from deity, it's from a metaphysical person. And it necessarily is invoked because there's no shield that can keep it out. Deity defines the ordered world and the space that makes up your body and your shield. All of that existence, all of that order is defined by deity. So, you know, there must be no intent to assert will over divinity. There must be no attempt to shield. It has to just be a full-on, I'm both possessed by it and expressing my will through it kind of experience in order for it to work. And it allows members of the coven to change themselves deliberately and consciously, which is a powerful thing. It is completely controlled. Invocation is kind of automatic. It's uncontrolled, and you really rely on knowing what energy you're invoking and then letting it have whatever influence it wants over you. Okay, letting it just unfold, opening yourself to the chaos of it because you're sure that it's a positive force. Whereas when you're aspecting, you know, it's less risky for the beginners because there's no chance that it's going to be some unknowable force or something more negatively chaotic. There's no chance that it's going to affect someone in an unpredictable way because they have complete control over how they interact with the being and internalize the messages that they receive from that interaction. So it's less risky for beginners to engage with deity through an aspected High Priestess than it is for them to engage on their own. And that's why the technique is prolific in Wicca, because most Wiccan covens are teaching covens. So that's aspecting, and it's very beneficial, but it's done rarely and by leaders only. So in summary, you know, for if you're binding the Fae, then you're trying to get your wishes granted and you're trying to achieve some unattainable goal. And if you do it wrong, you'll have some nasty side effects like unforeseen hardship and unluckiness and fatigue and exhaustion and parasites and distance and paranoia and physical injuries that are minor, like stub toes. And they're not trying to kill you. They're not trying to spread disorder. They're still manifestations of order. They're just mad at you. They're just being mad at you. Eventually they'll stop. Usually if you give an offering or you go do like some nature cleanup, you can get the Fae off your back usually. So it's not like a malicious thing. Ghosts aid in divination. They also can help power spells. And if you do a ghost binding gone wrong, it's a very emotional experience. It can be violent. Often negative emotions are the ones the most intensified because we have negative relationships with death. People can speak in tongues. You can see hysteria. People don't know what's real. Impulsiveness. Seizures can even happen in extreme cases, as well as self-harming behaviors. But ones that are more like, you know, trying to end it and not like just suffering for the sake of suffering. It's not perverse, you know, it's rational. That's how you know that it's death and not chaos. For demons, you know, they'll help manifest unattainable goals as well. In this case, where you have to manipulate people en masse. Okay, that's what demons specialize in, manipulating people. And if you have a demon binding gone wrong, you'll see, or any kind of possession scenario, you'll see the addiction to substances and the changes in mood and behavior that are more persistent and less about emotions. They're more perverse. Random cuts and bruises, usually that are not self-inflicted, but they can be, like we said. Chaos, items disappearing, reappearing, lights bursting, things breaking, nightmares, memory loss, possession, in the end, coma, and death by some means, usually if it goes the sad way. And then you have, for humans, you would bind them for purposes of combat, to curse them, to heal them, or to perform illusions that make use of their energy. An example of that is, so I once was in a concert and I just had a sore throat, and I borrowed my friend's energy, and she felt like she couldn't speak, sort of like in the Little Mermaid. But when I sang, it came through the lens of her vibrato and her energy and her stage presence. And as a result of it, I had enough energy to perform well in spite of my illness. And afterwards, that was actually my High Priestess who first initiated me to Wicca. And I remember afterwards, she's like, "What are you doing? Don't do that. That's so dangerous. Why did you do that?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't even think about it. I do that kind of thing all the time." That's why I'm such a mad woman, because I didn't have someone like her when I was learning these things. So you guys can learn from my mistakes, and don't experience emptiness and lack of direction, dissociation, and all this other madness that I've developed. I don't have vampirism or self-worth issues mostly, but all the rest of that I do have, because of just not even knowing that I was doing it. So sometimes people can be like that. And for deity, remember, that's for divine illusions. That's for furthering divine purposes only. You can't assert any will over deity. There's nothing more powerful on that level of existence than that level of existence. You're more powerful on this level. You could always ignore deity. You could further the purposes of disorder anytime you want. But on the higher planes, if you're trying to manipulate ordered existence in that subtle a way, you just can't do it. The only way to do it is through chaos, which is through inaction and non-thinking, right? So nirvana and peace, right? But so things that are in line with divinity anyway. Okay, so if you do try to do it and you fail, or like you're doing the wrong version of the LBRP, because remember, there's a chapter in my book that says the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram is sus, because it is. I really swear it's a trap, because it is oftentimes written to be an evocation of the all-conscious as you cast the circle. And it's really quite dangerous, for people that are experienced enough to succeed in it, to just try it every day. It can be dangerous. But for beginners, it's not dangerous at all. And that's why I think it's a trap, because it's so well designed. It's so smart that it doesn't trap anyone innocent. It only traps people that are ambitiously seeking secrets they're not ready for, that they ought not to seek. So I don't know. But don't evoke divinity, or bad things follow. Ego dysfunction, most of all. So that is our lecture for this time. It's much longer than I was hoping it would be, sorry, but it is very comprehensive on evocation and binding, what it is and how to do it safely for those of you who are advanced enough to know what to do. And for those who don't, try the basic stuff. Try exercise 4 at the end of the chapter has some assuming you've mastered shielding, try to, read energy of a person at a distance. Try to do a distance healing session. Try to read cards for someone. Try to make a sigil that someone else could use. Or all of that is safe enough for beginners to try. If you do it wrong, you'll be aware, because you'll start to feel off, and you can dial it back and be like, okay, this didn't go well, and just do some shadow work, and that's another learning experience. So it's really not a big deal. Beginners, this is the time. Give it a try. Do some basic binding. Be safe. Use shields. Master shields. And then give it a shot and have fun and see if you can make the world a better place, full of more love and more light. And that's it for this week. I hope you're enjoying your summer. I hope you're getting ready for your first harvest, and that you have a really bountiful crop and so much work in this season of life still coming. So many expressions of life to be found, even as the world begins to die again this year. So find your wisdom in both life and death, and balance in all things. And from everyone here at the Coven of the Open Mind, blessed be.